I wonder if you can speak to the president's forceful attempt, it would sound like, to beat down the critics who say, you know, I hear this woulda, shoulda, kept a small force there. But as Rick Stengel is pointing out, there is no low risk military operation.
Well, I think the end of his speech really summed up what President Biden believes about those who argue for another decade or 2 decades or 3 decades of American military involvement in Afghanistan. Those folks are arguing, as he said in his speech, that we could just have a low grade or low risk or low cost engagement there. And President Biden pointed out the very real human costs of staying at war, the costs borne by 1% of our population who fight in the armed forces and who year after year, decade after decade, bore those costs in Afghanistan. And he said, no, I'm not going to keep going. I'm not going to keep sending thousands of troops to fight in a civil war in another country for an open-ended period of time. And so, yes, he felt he was going to directly take on this argument being made chiefly by foreign policy professionals who are not fully accounting for the risks and the sacrifices and the costs borne by the selfless heroes who serve in our armed forces.
Jake, I want to ask you about something Matt Dowd said on this program yesterday. He said that what he detected in this president was also the experience of having been a father to someone who was in combat, and that experience is unknowable to anyone who hasn't had that. I wonder, obviously being by his side for all of the closed-door meetings, how much that came up, or was that just some of the experience he brought to this decision?
Well, I certainly don't want to reveal any of the comments the president made in closed-door meetings, but I would point out to you that in his speech today, when he was confronting this argument, this casual argument about how we can just kind of keep this going, don't worry too much about the cost, he specifically referenced his son, Beau. He said, you know, maybe it's because my son, Beau, served for a year in Iraq. Maybe it's because of all the other veterans I've met who have served over the course of many years as Joe Biden was senator and vice president and president. These personal elements, his own exposure to the costs of conflict, I do think have weighed heavily on him and have had a major impact in his thinking about what makes sense here. And I would also say, Nicole, and I think this is really important, that making a forceful case against open-ended war in Afghanistan did not distract the president from also making a very forceful case about how he is going to stay laser focused in a precise and targeted and effective way against terrorism. He believes that we can fight terrorism without fighting endless wars.
Well, and Courtney Kube, our Pentagon correspondent, made the point that the largest terror threat is actually in Yemen, where obviously we are not at war in Yemen. I want to get to that, but I just want to ask you if for your best analysis of where this gulf exists. This is a president who, as we've been talking about, you know, was a father. Beau was in combat. This is a president who cares very much about the military. He and Dr. Biden both. Where is this gulf coming from in the passionate disapproval from so many veterans like Paul Rykop, who's on our air right now? Why weren't the SIV recipients or applicants aided in cutting through some of that red tape?
So first of all, the SIV program, which has existed for many years, was not designed for a mass evacuation. That's just the truth. It was a bipartisan bill in Congress that was designed with a series of gates that each applicant had to pass through. You know how long the average time was for someone to pass through those gates? Not because of Joe Biden, but because of the nature of this legislation. 18 to 24 months per visa application. Some took years. When President Biden took office, he inherited a backlog of thousands of these visa applications, and he did cut through the red tape in a massive way. He slashed the amount of time to process these visas. And in July, he actually began an airlift of SIV applicants out of Afghanistan and to the United States. Now, it is true that he didn't conduct a 120,000 person evacuation in July, but he judged at the time that doing so would have caused the even more rapid and precipitous collapse of the Afghan government. In hindsight, given that it collapsed anyway, should we have started earlier? That's something that can be debated. But the notion that Joe Biden was not focused on processing these applications quickly, getting people on planes out of the country. I don't think the record backs that up. I think the president has been committed to helping those who helped us. He deployed 6,000 troops into harm's way to help get out the people who helped us, along with Americans and others. And he continues to be insistent that the United States will stay focused on getting out remaining Afghans to the United States. 120,000 people were evacuated from Afghanistan. I know there are people who say that's not enough. There's got to be more. And we're not done. But honestly, Nicole, the argument that somehow this is Joe Biden not standing up for the Afghan people and standing up for Afghans who helped us, this was a historic airlift that went far beyond what anybody had reasonably anticipated going into this.
Jake, I don't mean to put you on the defensive here. You don't answer to me. I just hear from a lot of veterans, and I hear you. It's an achievement, and I think most of my viewers are grateful to the president for ending this war. And I've been on the other side of this. The American public hasn't been enthusiastic about this effort for over a decade. I just want to understand the actual process now, though, because I'm sure you get calls now every day, either from news organizations or veterans who want you to help a specific person who's having a hard time. Can you tell me what that process looks like if the government is the enemy that wants to kill these people? How do you help them? What do you do when you get one of those calls?
Nicole, I think it's such a great question because it really illuminates the very personal nature of this mission. This is not about big abstract statecraft. This is about the individual lives of individual people and families. And I get calls and emails and texts about families, and so do all of my colleagues. And we get on the phone to, or had been getting on the phone to our team on the ground to say, how do we get them through the gate? How do we get them to a muster point? How do we get them on a bus? And we've been doing that family by family and group by group over the course of the past 17 days. And there have been great stories of success of getting people through. And there have been heartbreaking stories of people that we haven't yet been able to get out of the country. And we will never, ever be satisfied because no matter how this mission had unfolded or will unfold in the future, there's always going to be that person who didn't get out of Afghanistan. After 20 years of war, you're talking about not hundreds of thousands, but millions of people who in one way or another helped with this effort. So the process has been hard. It has been personal. And yes, it has required us, to your question, to work with the Taliban. As General McKenzie said last night, they've been businesslike in their approach with us, not because they're nice guys, they're not, but because they've had an interest along with us to make that evacuation mission run smoothly. Going forward, I think they'll have an interest in responding to our requests because we have an enormous amount of leverage over them. We intend to use that leverage to keep getting people out.
Just on those lines, what is the Taliban? Are they now our frenemy? Are they our adversary? Are they our enemy? What are they?
Well, it's hard to put a label on it, in part because we have yet to see what they are going to be now that they are in control, physical control of Afghanistan. They will, in the coming days, announce a government. That government is going to go around seeking diplomatic engagement, even recognition from other countries, including the United States. In fact, the Taliban spokesman today said he was looking for positive relations on behalf of the Taliban, especially with the United States. We're not just going to grant positive relations to the Taliban. They are going to have to earn everything from the international community through actions, not words. That begins with safe passage for Americans and Afghan allies. And that also includes them living up to their counterterrorism commitments, including that Afghanistan can never again be used as a base from which to attack the United States or our allies again.
Jake Sullivan, I want to just give you a last word on this. Seemed like a president exasperated. He did what he said he was going to do. He followed through on the exact same policy put in motion by his predecessor, with whom he agrees on very little, that it was Donald Trump who made this deal with the Taliban. Is there a feeling of frustration that some of the foreign policy establishment and media is piling onto this president when he's simply doing what he said he was going to do and following through on a deal made by the guy who came before him?
I think what you heard today, Nicole, was a president with conviction, genuine, deep conviction. It starts in his gut, it goes to his heart, and it occupies his head that the time had come for this war to end. the time had come for us to shift to a different model of fighting terrorism in Afghanistan and around the world. The time had come to bring American men and women home so that we were not entering a third decade in the middle of a civil war in another country, indeed in a country where the side we were supporting was not prepared to fight for itself. So the president isn't really thinking about all the media noise or all the critics. What he is thinking about is why he did this. And he did want to respond not to the chattering class, but to the arguments put forward about why we should stay. He really wanted to address those head on and say that he did not find merit or purchase in those arguments, that he thought the right and the sound decision for the American people and the American national security interest was to end the war in Afghanistan. He is proud that he did it. He is convicted in his having done so. And now, standing here today, he feels he's followed through on a commitment he made to the American people.